Export of 6 major commodities down in the list of top export items. A significant drop is noted in medicines, minus 53%, and vehicle re-export, 37%, Geostat reports.
According to a statement issued by the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD will help the Georgian Oil and Gas Corporation to refinance $250 million USD worth of Eurobonds. The funding agreement was made in response to the economic shock caused by COVID-19. In addition, the financial package will support the planned reforms in the state company. These include the development of the natural gas exchange market.
Georgian taxpayers will finance the harvest of 50 million Georgian gal for viticulturists in the years of vintage. This is known from the document published on the website of the State Procurement Agency. The Procurement Agency is considering two proposals for the viticulturist subsidy program. The first is the request of Akura Ltd for the purchase of 35 million Georgian lari of grapes, and the second is the request of the Crop Management Company for the purchase of 15 million Georgian lari of grapes.
Even though it is impossible to predict how any currency behaves under the floating exchange rate, the president of the National Bank, Koba Gvenetadze, said most probably lari went below the equilibrium. According to Gvenetadze, after overcoming the uncertainty related to the pandemic and overcoming the traditional pre-election agitation, the rate will find its equilibrium point.
Restrictions that may be imposed during the pandemic in the future will not be systemic and will be only targeted. Prime Minister Giorgi Gaharia said at the government session this week. According to the Prime Minister, despite the fact that the Georgian healthcare system is weaker compared to the developed countries, the country coped well with the pandemic.
Daniel Dalton, CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce in Brussels, writes in his own Twitter page that the project of digital corridor is under danger in Georgia due to Georgian government's hostile actions. Interesting developments take place in Georgia as the project of digital corridor is under danger. Internet availability might be restricted to up to 2 billion users due to Georgian government's actions. To note, the Caucasus is the shortest road between the EU and Asia. As for the alternative route, it includes Russia, which is the issue of privacy and security for the EU in terms of tech news and technology, Dalton wrote in his post.
So this is the Checkpoints, co-authored and hosted by Elena Kvanchilashvili and myself, Georgi Sakadze. We're here to give you the short outlook about everything that needs to be followed.
Good evening. This is probably the first time that the finance minister, Ivane Machavariani, was asked to be interviewed in English in Georgia for the online Georgian media product. And it is the Checkpoints, aired every Sunday at 10 p.m. on BMG and Forbes-G. Thanks for watching us.
Probably you remember how we told you the other week that Tbilisi will be the host city for 2021 ADB's 54th annual meeting. At the same time, Georgian Finance Minister Ivane Machavariani has been elected chairman of the Board of Governors of the Asian Development Bank for 1 year.
Yes, Georgi, the importance of holding the ADB annual meeting in Georgia in 2021 definitely cannot be overlooked. To say the least, during this event, about 5,000 high-ranking guests will visit the country.
About this and many other not less important things, we can now listen to what the Finance Minister of Georgia, Ivane Machavariani, had to say to the Checkpoints. Mr. Minister, thank you so much for your time. My first question is how well Georgia's economy is recovering from COVID. I mean, did all the figures, all the estimates met your expectations? How do you evaluate the situation?
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
First of all, let me start with what we've been doing during the last 6 months, which has been extremely challenging for the world in general, globally, and for Georgia. We were quite successful initially in containing the virus, implementing containment measures, relatively short-term lockdowns, which proven to be very effective in managing the spread of virus. This enabled us to start reopening process as quickly as possible, and somewhere at the beginning of the summer we were almost fully, all restrictions were almost lifted when it comes to domestic activities and domestic economy. The only challenge was, and still remains, still is the visitors and tourism, but that's a global challenge. But we were quite effective and successful in reopening our domestic economy. That actually contributed very positively in the recovery process. Everyone witnessed that summer season was quite impressive in terms of domestic tourism. This wouldn't happen if we did not introduce and impose the early restriction measures at the very beginning of pandemics. Therefore, I believe that this strategy was absolutely unquestionably effective.
While moving to the next step of the recovering in regards of your relations with IFIs, etc., your predictions in regards of 2021, in regards of tourism, what do you think? It's quite difficult right now to have any kind of estimates, but how well we're going to recover in regards of tourism?
Yeah, it's very challenging question.
Do you expect at least 30-40%?
We have several scenarios. So our baseline scenario assumes around 40%, close to 40.
2021.
For 2021. However, again, it's I don't want to sound speculative. So as time goes, we are fine tuning our estimates, and we will be more closer to reality. However, when it comes to fiscal budgeting, here we are much conservative, and of course we are planning our revenues and our collection based on more safe and conservative
way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me.
But still, for the next year, we expect 5% growth in general. I mean,
but it's definitely going to be plus.
Definitely, of course.
And around 5%.
Next year, Georgia will grow. Georgian
around
economy
5%.
will grow around 5%. Here, we share the same view with the Monetary Fund and other institutions.
Another credit you were granted from local business community, international community as well, were quite successful negotiations with IFIs. Right in the beginning of pandemic, it was not just successful, but also was quite tough, quick. At the same time, Georgia gained around $1.5 billion of the total amount. I'm talking generally, including euro and dollars, and it's around 7, 8 to 12 international financial organizations with whom you had negotiated. Could you explain more?
Absolutely.
Because I know you could have much more funds allocated for it, but at the same time, it's worth to mention, Mr. Minister, that it's not just for 2020, that it's for period for the upcoming year.
Absolutely. At the very beginning of the pandemics, we immediately, of course, rushed to our colleagues and partners internationally. And I want to say here that all of them, they were very open and responsive. So we had a very intensive month and a half negotiations with each and every of them, especially, of course, everything started with the Monetary Fund, and we tried to quickly assess our economic situation and to see what will be the financing gap for 2020 in order to go and then start negotiation with different IFIs. And I want to thank all of them. They were extremely open, extremely responsive, and we managed within 1.5 months almost to agree with the shake hands. And then, of course, the paperwork has started and money started arriving. And as you mentioned rightly, by the end of the year, we are expecting to accumulate more than 1.5 billion US dollar, and again, part of it, of course, will serve as a buffer, which we definitely need more than ever in these times of uncertainty, and therefore for 2021 we are safe in terms of fiscal buffers. We are fully confident that our financing gap is fully covered and fully secured.
Definitely for 2021 budget, it will be adopted by the new parliament.
Yes,
that's a true story.
That will be tough.
That's challenging, yeah?
That's challenging. You know, there are two types of challenge. One is the time constraint, because by law we need to pass it by the end of the year.
With the existing parliament?
No, by the end of the year we need to pass.
Yeah.
So
final approval.
Yeah, so first two submissions will be
with the old one.
With the old one. Last one will be with the new one, and there is a very limited time for passing the law. You know, budget
the final,
is a law. Is a law. So yeah, I am sure it will be very tough in terms of discussion, in terms of, you know, really have, I mean in terms of hearings, but on the other hand it's tough because of time constraints. So
when do we plan to have the final consultations as well as with IMF in regards of 2021?
As you probably know, IMF mission starts maybe in October, in the beginning of October, virtually, unfortunately. This time they won't be able to physically visit Georgia.
They miss us.
Definitely miss us, and we miss them.
Yeah.
So
sure.
the mission starts, and of course, recently we had a staff visit, and we of course talked a little bit on 2021 as well, but this mission visit will be fully dedicated to 2021 budget.
Taking into consideration absolutely unpredictable and unprecedented situation happening around, you are still positive in regards of the Georgian economic recovery and the future for 2021?
I think we should look
to the
situation, to the current situation, from a bit different angle, and I mean from the more positive angles. If you look at Georgia, how this country has managed the pandemic, the COVID itself, for this period, how they managed to close the financing gap, how they use this funding, you see that Georgia has shown resilience. Georgia has shown dynamism and pragmatism at the same time. This definitely positively contributes to our reputation, to this country's reputation, which makes me think and makes me feel that this, the way we are building our reputation and the way we are showing to the rest of the world how resilient and how responsive we were, how effective we were in responding to the pandemics. This definitely this will have a long-lasting effect, and this will we will capitalize from them in a longer run. Maybe not right. I mean, next six months to 1 year. Of course, global the challenge remains pandemic again. But in longer term, the way we manage this process, the whole 2022 will definitely be capitalized in our reputation.
And ADB.
Longer lasting.
Yeah, ADB and Congress with chairmanship.
Thank you.
By May 2021, we have a chance. Crossing the fingers, we're going to host this truly wonderful event. Tell us a bit more. What is it for Georgia? Because we do understand the meaning of the event.
When such a small country, is hosting and winning the right to host such a huge event,
It was a sort of competition.
It was, and finally we won it, and we are very grateful. We are very honored with that. You know, ADB is one of the greatest institutions, and we will be receiving close to 3 to 5,000 guests. You know, high-ranking visitors. This is a chance for Georgia not only to show its hospitality and show its culture, but also it puts Georgia not only as a great touristic destination, which it does, but it puts Georgia on the map of global finance, on the map of global players, and it sort of positions us in a absolutely new and very, very interesting way, from the interesting angle, and we deserve it. We deserve it, I believe, because we are a reformer country, one of the top reformers. I believe that we deserve to be hosting
this event,
such a great event, and fingers crossed.
We're going to be hosting it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Not virtual. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Mr. Minister.
Along the lines of your interview with the Finance Minister, Giorgi, let me now focus our attention on IMF's assessment of government and national banks' policies as agreed in the program and just recently reviewed by the mission.
Yes, Elena, as we may well remember, an International Monetary Fund team held virtual meetings during September from 8th to 14th, 2020, to discuss recent economic and financial developments and progress with the structural reforms.
We asked IMF's representative in Georgia, Mr. Salim Chakir, to kindly allocate some time for us and provide a deeper explanation and assessment of a relatively short statement that was issued by the IMF after the completion of these virtual meetings. Now is the time to air the interview.
IMF mission had to also comply with COVID-19, and this was the mission that was a virtual mission, so to say. How does that feel? Is that a little bit peculiar?
Thanks, Elena. Indeed, these are peculiar times. I mean, and we have to adapt, right? And of course, you know, the IMF team clearly prefers a physical visit to Georgia rather than a virtual one. But, you know, the safety comes first.
Definitely. Yeah. We prefer face-to-face interviews as well, but, you know, journalism has to adapt as well, since the health is first, definitely. Now about the findings of the mission, I have here an excerpt which reads, growth is expected to contract by 5%, a slightly higher contraction than at the time of the sixth review. What caused a little bit more severe slowdown in the second quarter of 2020?
I mean, at the time of the sixth review, which is like May, beginning of May, late April, you remember uncertainty was large. And we were working under a global assumption that the shock would have a V-shaped recovery, now which is, of course, no longer the case. Yes, the contraction in demand was larger than we assumed in April and May, and the recovery, you know, seems to take more time than we initially envisaged. We were also hoping for international flights to resume sometime in July, in line with the announcement and expectations at the time. But in reality, those international flights only took place for a limited set of countries and with delay because of you know, COVID developments globally. Now, still, the preliminary data suggests a tentative recovery in domestic demand beginning in June. You know, we see growth in credit to the private sector remains relatively strong. It's partly supported by, of course, government subsidies on the lari-denominated mortgages. So we stopped at -5%. We didn't revise it further down.
IMF statement says that the COVID-19 pandemic's health impact has been well contained, but it has had a significant impact on economic activity. That's what we read from the statement. Do you think that Georgia currently is using well its status of a green country.
The pace of the pandemic, will dictate the pace of the opening up of the economy, right? Until the pandemic is clearly in the rear view mirror, as we say, really we cannot expect a full reopening of the economy. I mean, it is possibly safe to assume that the social distancing will be with us probably in 2021 as well. Credit of the authorities, they have proven that they have a good understanding of the epidemic so far, and also they are well aware of Georgia's capacity constraints to deal with it. So I would really rely on their judgment if further containment measures are necessary or not.
You mentioned that the uncertainty is still high. What business says is that a volatile exchange rate adds even more to this uncertainty that is inherent to this COVID-19 pandemic. NBG is selling reserves, but it has very little so to say, impact on exchange rate. Is business community's logic clear to you?
I mean, look, the National Bank of Georgia does not target a level in the exchange rate, right? But rather aims to avoid.
Of course.
Yeah, but they try to avoid excessive volatility because it also has implications for inflation. We think the floating exchange rate regime serves Georgia well. And the exchange rate is doing what it's supposed to do. It is playing its shock absorbing role. Now, the National Bank of Georgia has been active, particularly relative to past, right, in trying to limit the excessive volatility in the exchange rate. The interventions has been more frequent, but also remember, unlike other central banks, National Bank was careful in reducing its policy rate, possibly, against this backdrop of volatility in lari and its impact on inflation. So we think this is the right approach. The best way for companies and individuals to deal with the exchange rate is to borrow in the currency they earn, right? To start with, which would be the Georgian lari for most of them. Now, we again think this recent developments and volatility also show that National Bank was correct in its efforts to reduce the dollarization through its regulatory changes. Now, of course, the businesses suffer, and the support to businesses in those difficult times has to come from the budget, and the government has been active on that front. It has increased the size of the credit guarantee fund considerably. We understand its use has been rather limited, and that the government is now in consultation with banks and corporates to find ways to increase its use, possibly by addressing some of the design issues it might have. There is also interest subsidy to small and medium-sized hotels. Now, for the construction sector, there was an extensive support package that included also this famous 4% interest subsidy on lari mortgages. And if there is a need, we believe the government would continue to provide support to businesses. There is room in the budget for that.
NBG might spend more than 200 million USD of reserves to contain inflation. So far, what we see is that it is selling 40 million USD tranches. Is this policy of selling reserves agreed with IMF?
Yes, in the program we have what we call net international reserve target, right? And that more or less is as a result of the balance of payments forecast we do. We have a forecast of inflows and outflows, and based on that we set those limits. And if you look in detail to those limits that is set in the program, it gives a lot of room to National Bank of Georgia, and the National Bank of Georgia has been using it.
And government also spending money to alleviate at least to some extent, this COVID-19 impact on households, on businesses. So on the other hand, it is also some kind of how to say, the pressure on exchange rate.
One would argue for, that the economy needs much more fiscal support and monetary support, but there are always trade-offs, and one of those trade-offs is inflation, partly driven by this volatility in the exchange rate. As long as the government adheres to the targets in the program, which they do, we think we don't see a big source of worry.
You also mentioned, and IMF's statement also puts an emphasis that in response to declining economic activity and easing inflation pressures, the NBG appropriately reduced its policy rate. What should be the policy towards easing this rate?
Very good question. I mean, it is the central bank's decision. We think so far the policy response has been appropriate. My guess is that they would be in a wait and see approach. They will wait to see how the exchange rate behaves and its impact on inflation. But we think inflation is now below 5%. We think the trajectory is the correct trajectory in the sense that it will continue to decline. It may or may not reach 3% target by the end of this year. It may take a bit longer. But we think, say, early next year, this 3% target is achievable.
One more option that politicians speak, since we're in an election period, on how to give the economy the room to breathe, so to say, and to rebound, is to decrease the taxes and, as they say, leave more money into the pockets of individuals.
The tax burden on the economy is moderate in Georgia. So we don't see a need or a macroeconomic case to lower the government's revenue. Where we see a room is that there are those VAT rebates, and if you read our program documents, we expect the government to move to an automated system. The current level of budget and the buffers existing would allow government to move to this automated system. That would be one area that we will be discussing with the authorities.
Do you see the room for recommending, for example, the contrary, for example, raising, for example, excise tax to generate more revenue?
At this stage, we don't see a reason to increase taxes or tax rates. We think the government has the ability, to sustain a high level of deficit for some time. Of course, this has to be accompanied with a medium-term plan for fiscal consolidation.
Would you elaborate a little bit on that?
The Liberty Act requires government to bring the fiscal deficit down to 3% by 2023. So we would be careful in asking for a premature fiscal consolidation.
What will be some of the structural reforms that we need to keep an eye on?
We had two critical conditionality, right, in the program on the structural measure side. Now, one of them was the pension indexation, which passed with the supplemental budget. The other one is the insolvency law. Now, the law has passed very recently, but it has to be implemented. And what COVID does is it made it a bit more urgent. Now, our program is expiring next year, April. And if we have a new program, possibly this time, it will have some structural reform elements, focusing on state-owned enterprises and reforming them. This is an area that we haven't touched upon a lot in the current program.
Thank you so much for taking.
I'll be happy to. Thanks a lot, Ellen.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye.
To talk a little bit, About the context where all these discussions with the finance minister or the IMF's representative in Georgia originate, we have our loyal partner TBC Research to provide us with correct numbers and well-observed tendencies.
Indeed, Georgi, according to TBC Research, a significant recovery in tourism is expected in the second quarter of 2021. In the baseline scenario, TBC Research expects tourism inflows to drop by 83% year-on-year in 2020, meaning almost no tourism inflows through the remaining period of 2020. 2021 should be a year of recovery. However, the inflows are still being down by around 50% compared with the 2019 level. The inflows are expected to exceed pre-crisis levels by 2022. The widespread use of an effective vaccine assumed in the first half of 2021 will lead to the gradual recovery of international travel. At the same time, improved consumer sentiments and pent-up demand for leisure will contribute to relatively quick recovery of tourism inflows. Corporate travel is expected to take longer to recover as companies are reducing their travel budgets, and regular video conferencing has created a substitute for in-person meetings. The region's economies account for approximately half of inbound tourism inflows to Georgia, and repeated visits also comprise a relatively high share, while corporate and long-distance travel is not significant. Georgia's tourism industry has demonstrated resilience and strong potential for growth, as evidenced by 20% growth in the months period to COVID-19 breakout, despite Russia's flight ban in summer 2019.
I fully agree with you, Elena. And one more important point is that according to TBC Research, which draws on the budget project itself, an additional increase in foreign debt by the equivalent of 5.2 billion Georgian lari, year-to-year increase of 1.55 billion USD, and an increase in domestic debt by 1.8 billion Georgian lari is planned. TBC Research assesses the additional funding is enough to finance the increased budget deficit, as well as to create an additional buffer of 2.7 billion Georgian lari. It's around 5.4% of GDP, which will be available in case of additional deterioration of the macro scenario. TBC Research also says that given the sufficient financing of the shortfall in external inflows and the priority to bring inflation to the target, a relative stability of the Georgian lari real effective exchange rate and the US Georgian lari is projected by December 2020. Given the relative stability of the currencies of Georgia's main economic partners against the USD GAL exchange rate is expected to stand at around 3.15, unchanged from August 17 estimates. For the more details, sectoral review, I talked with Otar Nadaraya. He's TBC chief economist.
How Georgia is recovering from COVID situation were met, because some estimates are quite similar what TBC Capital was stating just a few months ago, and where do we stand right now?
Yes, thank you, Georgi. Yes, you are right. So I would say, broadly speaking, except tourism and tourism related sectors, we have quite a strong recovery, basically, in almost all sectors. Also, you mentioned exports and remittances, especially remittances, but also exports. I mean, exports dynamics in this environment is quite promising. So broadly speaking, I would say mostly in line with our expectations. So initially we had something like -4.5, -5.5. So maybe now after some spike of virus recently in Georgia, so without additional fiscal stimulus, it would be in a range of -5, -5.5. But in any case, even take into account the sizable fiscal stimulus in Georgia, I think those numbers are quite good. Again, take into account our dependence on the tourism influence.
Can we consider that some of our colleagues are still arguing and strongly recommending to the governmental authorities that additional stimulus from fiscal funds should be diverted to tourism, and especially in their relations with the banks.
Keep in mind that this is debt financing, yes. So this is debt raised externally again, but what should be repaid in the coming years, yes. I would argue more if the government utilizes additional buffers they have, so probably more on the infrastructure side, or maybe they push more on initiatives like I like very much the initiative like to work remotely from Georgia, but probably you need some additional package
potential, but it needs some additional pushing,
yes,
because
yes. So
we can potential, but there is no some sort of ambition, Otar. That's my personal.
Yes, definitely. The boom probably was quite aggressive pre-COVID-19. Tourism. I would say, but still, I would say, I mean, best to my understanding, still manageable. If you look at occupancy rates, those were still higher as compared with other countries. So, for example, if you look
at all the estimates could be met, and if we could talk about some predictability within the COVID situation, if we can, you still remain with your estimates that the best period for the beginning of the total recovery is going to be the end of the second quarter of 2021. Am I right?
Yes, definitely. Yes, definitely. And we project something like 50% drop still in 2021 of inflows compared to the 2019 level. Of course, you're going to have a huge increase, sharp increase in 2021 compared to 2020. But still, if you think of 50%, again, mostly on the back of the second half of the year, as you argued, still, if you think of 50%, it's not that bad. Again, I can't talk about all hotels, but yes, whole industry. But if you assume like let's say occupancy rates, so occupancy rates were well above 60% in Georgia. So I mean, for the break even in average, I mean, again, on average for the hotel, so occupancy rate of something like 35% should be sufficient for the break even. However, without that service, yes. So
without the service, yeah.
Even half recovers. We have break even without that service, little bit more, and then they start that service.
Otar, my last question in this regards is: do you expect, due to the recovery trends and main macro parameters, what do we have any additional revisions on your behalf or IFI's for the existing year?
Again, I would argue on the upside we have probably additional fiscal stimulus, and of course on the downside we have again muted recovery and second wave, and more importantly lockdowns. Yes, of course, higher number of cases is very important and very unfortunate. What we see not only in Georgia, but and still hopefully we are still doing relatively well. But as you can see from our latest research, macro sector overview, so it's a lockdown what impacts the growth, not really the number of cases. I mean, certainly you have correlation between those two, but still, like if you look at same if you look at countries with same number of cases and just different approaches, so it's a lockdown what matters. So I would say again, -5, -5.5 looks reasonable. Yes, so there is probability for the review, but I would say not. I would say not significant.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for being a part of Checkpoint.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Before we turn to the probably the most dominant context of all these days, COVID-19, let us bring into the program some inspiration that with hard work and persistent effort, things can work out in all times, and crises can serve as eye-openers and startups of totally new endeavors. Do you agree, Georgi?
Well, and again, and as usual, I fully agree with the spirit right now, and let me introduce Made in Georgia, our permanent focus in the checkpoints. The businesses are indeed the ones who try to turn an idea into an action and to contribute to the Georgian economy. Gocha Chagashvili, founder of Tzivi Sqeli, started his business after the 2008 crisis with making Georgian cheese sulguni at home. Today, different types of cheese he makes have reached over 200. His philosophy of doing business is that a business without a fresh approach and attitude is doomed to fail. Such philosophy has taken Tzivi Sqeli to different markets in the US, Dubai and China. Salome Chibashvili, as usual, found a new voice of Georgian business for the checkpoints.
The idea came up in 2008. After a lot of hardship, we had nothing to do, but we knew we had to do something. So we started home-making cheese with a small amount of milk. In 2 years, we saw that this business had a future. Today, as you can see, we have about 40 employees. We were not financially pampered. The first investment was in the amount of 50,000 lari because we had a mission to meet the requirements of the Georgian legislation. We started with one type of cheese, sulguni, then came up with different ideas. So today we make 8 types of cheese and we have up to 200 varieties. Before this pandemic, our enterprise used to run 3,000 liters of milk per day, but nowadays we have a bit of a hard time selling, so we're working with 1,000 liters of milk. We have had this name Tzivi Sqeli since 2010. The people of Tel Aviv will understand this story. So we have the mountains of Tziv Kombori, where a mini enterprise was located and cheese was made. The enterprise was quite famous with its product, which they called Tzivi Sqeli. So we kept the name and therefore the legacy. We're not competitive with the market. We buy quality milk and pay a high price. We try to have high quality milk, which is very expensive. Our product price varies from 15 to 40 lari. Business without innovation is doomed to fail. So we try to add something new to our business every year. With the support of American Chamber of Commerce, we, along with other entrepreneurs, went to the US, specifically to Chicago, where we established a connection with a man who then became one of our cheese exporters. We have already shipped our cheese to the US, where it has received great approval and is available in 7 stores. We are currently waiting for doubled orders. A small enterprise like ours is nothing for the American market, but the important thing is that we managed to send our product to the American market and gained the ability to sell quality cheese there. We export our products to Dubai and China in small quantities. If you do not start from something small, you will not be able to reach greatness, and I'm glad that we have already started.
To tell you the truth, we don't know in what time COVID-19 may turn into a driving force of new businesses. Some are probably taking advantage right now, but they are definitely very few. COVID-19 is still contributing to the highest level of uncertainty that the world has never known before. If we look at key macro parameters, you can see the impact of COVID-19 everywhere. For example, GDP drop is expected in the range of 5 to 5.5% in 2020. However, given increasing infection numbers without an additional fiscal stimulus, the 2020 growth outlook is being tilted to the lower end of the range, though the economy is expected to recover in 2021. This is also a TBC research point which says that fiscal stimulus will remain a major driver until the recovery of tourism. Inflation is expected to return to the 3% target by the end of 2020. Despite faster than expected reduction of inflation, sharp monetary policy rate cuts are unlikely, as the exchange rate, which is in its turn heavily influenced by COVID-19 situation, remains a significant risk factor for the growth of prices.
Elena, thank you for this preface. When we talk about COVID-19 and in Georgia's context, it is almost impossible not to remember these 2 names, Akaki Zoidze and David Gzerishvili. Both of them professionals with a good knowledge of not only local but global medical environments, both of them out-of-box thinkers, and not only thinkers, but doers as well. I had a chance to unite them in one online session, and we can now hear their take on how Georgia is dealing with the pandemic and do we need to open up. Let us hear these professional voices in the checkpoints.
How well Georgia used the period, used the advantages, what you, and I'm quoting you personally again, we were doing much better than some richest European countries and even others. Please.
Because I think that was due to the early containment measures that we took, despite that the WHO didn't have a mandatory recommendation of, for example, banning the travel from China. We did it earlier. We did earlier to close the borders and managed to basically prevent the imported cases. And then had been quite with the targeted testing, have been quite consistent with the steps that we took so far. And we also know about the measures that have been taken in terms of increasing the testing capacity. We know that primary healthcare doctors who are trained to manage the cases at home, and we know as well that some infection control measures were taken. And as based on the public information available, we also have personal mobilization plans for hospitals in case if there will be a surge of hospitalized cases, which gonna be already, and it's climbing. The figures and numbers are climbing of hospitalized patients and those requiring intensive care and ventilation equipment. All this will be ready.
David, my next question, personal to you: are all those expectations met? You were quite. I cannot say you were pessimistic. You were quite realistic in expectation. Yes, correct. Yeah. Where do we stand right now as a country?
My cautious approach, it was more than skepticism. I sound very pessimistic. And the reason of me, there were several, and I try to now compare what has changed since then. Let's take three domains. One domain is its health. So in terms of health, I think two criteria. One, the ability to detect cases, track cases, diagnose and isolate. I think the ability, I hope so, at least as of now, we proved that we can do it very well, and we're doing it well. Another part of the keeping people health, so minimizing health losses because of the epidemic, ability of the system to handle it. I am not sure that we increase its capacity to the extent that is needed to handle it. Probably there were investments, but I don't have any numbers. So far, I mean, in April, May, June, it was no test. We were hospitalized patients which needed to be treated home. So we have nothing to be excited about how good we were in terms of handling severe patients. Now the test starts. And maybe in a month or two, we will see how truly we prepared well. And another domain is people behavior, self-discipline, compliance with rules. What does it mean to live with this virus? Co-living or coexistence, cohabitation. And I'm not sure we really explained it to anybody because we wanted to celebrate we defeated it, so we are the best, and then it was a little bit weird to tell at the same time the people that still you need to wear masks, you need to do this and that. And we haven't punished anybody for clear, open violation of rules, let's say mass gathering in closed spaces. So to me, in terms of progress, in terms of securing more rational behavior, I don't see any progress against the two criteria. So another minus. And third one, economic, which is my weakest professional area, but I could say that as to economy, I hope that at least in the rhetoric, but still it comes, but it's more and more people understand clearly that there is no health on the one hand and economy on the other hand, or well-being, welfare, right? No, because economy here is suffers from poor management and balance between health and people's behavior. So one is obvious that if people's behavior is not improving and we are getting to the red zone for health system to handle cases, then the people in power who will be forced to limit mobility, which indirectly will limit and reduce economy. If I count it out of the 6 criteria, only one is plus. This is active case detection, active epidemiological measures, 0 close to minus ability of the system to handle, and other 4 criteria are all minus.
I'm a bit more optimistic though within the same criteria. I would assess some of those. Predictability is very important. The economic outlook is still unclear. I agree on that. And we need to give more predictability. But I still believe that we can instigate more compliance in our compatriots. We have a major threat ahead that more people will be in the closed spaces. The cold period, the system will be more, our body will be more susceptible to this pathogen, considering that the cold. So in this case, I think that I'm a bit more optimistic than David, but not entirely.
Georgi, you have just 30 seconds. In terms of punishing or motivating for rational behavior, I can share a little bit your optimism maybe after election, because we belong to the culture where collection of fines from drivers because of obvious violations of rules reduced dramatically 2 months before the elections. Yeah, so this is our and I don't think anybody will impose fines.
So anyway, I hope that we'll at least gather in the open spaces. And I see in terms of the preparedness of the system, I believe that we have more, and I still would rely on these first frontline providers. I mean, the epidemiologists who will, I think they also are adding some additional force, and detect, isolate, diagnose, detect, isolate, I think will be the key at this stage.
That's the only our hope.
It will be a key weapon for us to counter this. And if we will not have an exponential growth for the next couple months, I don't think that the government will have a major pressure to do some not very smart lockdowns. I mean, because what is now and the global experience is the smart mobility restriction measures, the ones that are extremely targeted and with expected concrete effect, and not just nationwide lockdowns, which have been maybe a case in the beginning of the pandemic when there are many unknowns. But now we have much more, we have better knowledge globally and locally, how to manage it, how to do.
David Kakis, thank you so much for being with us for this time, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David. Thank you, Georgi.
Georgi, back to your emphasis while introducing this interview to us and talking of out-of-box approaches. You would probably agree that Forbes 30 Under 30 is a good example of it as well. Young people who try to think globally, not only locally, and not only think but act as well. Up to this point, and I hope our viewers join me in this assessment, none of 30 Under 30 characters have left us with doubt that they can reach their goals. Mariam Adamia met Ketevan Gegenava, a 29-year-old Georgian girl in charge of the Irish hotel chain MHL Collection, which combines Marriott, Hilton, Intercontinental Dublin, and many more brands.
My everyday work really consists of analysis of market and trends, especially in very unstable and unprecedented times that we live in right now. So the first benefit, I think, is the actual information that consists of competitor set analysis, analysis of trends, analysis of tourism segments, also understanding what type of advertising works in which country. So this information subsequently helps companies of both private and public sector spend their budget wisely and also understand where they should focus their marketing efforts so their return on investment is high enough. If I would look over the projects that I've completed, the largest and most interesting project was certainly opening Marriott franchise hotels on islands of Great Britain and Ireland. So these hotels were not part of their main franchise line, which would include Four Seasons, St. Regis, W Hotels, Westin. So everything we had to do was supposed to be done from scratch. So it was incredibly interesting for myself and my team. If I would look over the projects that I've done in Georgia, the most important one, unfortunately, is paused due to pandemic. And the main goal of this project is to present Georgia as a tourism destination to segments and travelers in countries of Northern and Western Europe. So I have fingers crossed that the project will resume very soon. Now, coronavirus has affected pretty much every industry, but especially travel and hospitality. Hotels have shut down globally. Travel is not a thing anymore, flights have been cancelled, so it affected our group as well, of course. At the moment we have reopened 11 out of 12 hotels, but given the fact that our largest segments and tours would come from Northern America and Australia, the demand is very low. However, we're trying to focus on local tourism and so-called staycations, and we think this type of arrangement would last until spring 2021. I have 9 years of experience working with individual and global brand hotels. I certainly don't think it's a lot because I do work with individuals who have 30 and 40 years experience in the field. I started gaining my experience when I first arrived in Ireland in 2012. So I was combining practical work with the theoretical knowledge that I was acquiring through my master's degree in Dublin. I certainly aim for e-commerce, and this includes what I do at the moment, also understanding and learning some of the new technical fields, which I plan to do very soon. I also want to open an agency, a consulting agency that will specifically target marketing and management development in Georgia. Oftentimes I hear that sales and marketing are grouped together, and because benefits of sales can be seen faster than marketing, this latter often gets swept under the rug and sales prevail. So the aim of this agency would be to specifically focus on marketing and analysis of market and trends, which subsequently will be very, very beneficial for sales as well.
How are foreign investors doing in Georgia? This is a question that pops out from time to time, especially after looking at FDI statistics. I decided to ask Fadi Asli, chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce, the largest business association in Georgia uniting foreign businesses, to do SWOT analysis of the business environment from the perspective of FDI. Here's what he has to say. Let's do a brief SWOT analysis of business environment in Georgia currently, and let's start with challenges.
Now that we look backward, we realize that it was an error to go on full lockdown as the government did. And it's fortunate that they realized it and they're not taking us on full lockdown now. Now the issue is that this lockdown has destroyed many businesses. Main challenge is to restart the economy. The main challenge is to support the small and medium enterprises that are the ones who suffer the most. Those small and medium enterprises that rely on the day-to-day work and income, they have been totally destroyed.
Yeah, the big part of the foreign debt that we have accumulated from IFA is also is focusing on small and medium enterprises and supporting them during and after this pandemic. Do you see this money being distributed wisely?
Elena, let me tell you, I mean, what we received is $1.5 billion, which is nothing compared to the cost of closing the country for 6 months. The cost, as we assessed it, till the end of the year is going to be around $6 billion. So what's $1.5 billion compared to the cost? This is one. Two, I don't know, I mean, if many people are aware, but every quarter we have to pay back in foreign currency about $1 billion for the external debt that we have contracted, both the government and the private sector, okay? This means that this money that came in would be barely enough to cover 4 months of servicing the debt. The government should have paid $780 per person to be at par with what the United States, PPP, I'm telling you, as the same purchasing power parity. So when you pay $60, it's not even 6% of what other countries have been giving PPP to their citizens. So it's more of a cosmetic psychological donation than a real thing that would really help people out of trouble.
How psychological is that donation? Because we understand that all of this, right? We understand that we have a floating exchange rate, everything. But would you name a lari exchange rate and its depreciation as one of the challenges at this point? And is it because of COVID-19?
Our GDP in 2012 was about $16.5 billion. With all the gymnastics that the government played in 2019, we increased it by 7%. We were 17.7 billion. This means in 8 years we increased our GDP by 7%, which is laughable, which is absolutely nothing. Up to this point, if I'm not mistaken, the government has already subsidized the lari this year for 440 or 480 million. Until the end of the year, it will be like $600 million. When you subsidize your currency, it's not anymore a floating currency. You're indexing it to a certain rate of the dollar artificially. All the forecasts show that by the end of 2020, the GDP would come back to what it was in 2012, the same level. This means 8 years we worked for nothing.
Do you see any strengths?
Yes, the government manipulated people. It was their biggest success, as a matter of fact. They drew people into believing that if they didn't close the borders and destroy their businesses and their livelihood, they would have died. This is the success of the government, to be very transparent and honest. Besides that, what kind of success? We have two business climates. We have one for the companies that are in partnership with the Georgian Dream parliamentarian and ministers and Bizina's, Ivanishvili's cronies, and we have a business climate for the rest of the people. Now, for those who are in partnership with the Georgian Dream officials, we are back to the 1990s when everyone had a Krisha. But for all the rest and all other investors, it is Golgotha. I mean, every step is pain.
I remember when statistics showed that FDI in Georgia grew by 0.5%. Natia Turnava, the Minister of Economy, said that despite COVID-19, this is the clear sign that FDI is flowing to the country and that foreign investors have higher expectations of the economy in post-COVID period.
Let us dissect the FDI that came in 2020 in the country. 40% of it is reinvestment. This means companies that are working in Georgia already are extending their business. This is 40%. Another 40 or 45% comes from Georgian companies that are registered abroad, in Malta, in the Cayman Islands, in Panama, in Britain, TBC Bank, Bank of Georgia, okay? They repatriate some money here, So this is considered to be foreign investment, which is technically not foreign investment. And then you have 15 to 20%, which is real foreign investment. Now to get deeper in the picture, if you go to the reinvestment part, on the long term it's very good for the country, but on the short term it's terrible. They're not bringing hard currency from abroad. They are sending hard currency from Georgia abroad. If you look at the real foreign investors, like the Turks, some of this foreign investment is not money, it is equipment. Our exports have decreased substantially, but even those exports, not all the money that goes out in merchandise, in goods, is coming back to the country. Part of it comes back to the country to continue the operation, but the major exporters are keeping their money out. This means if you look practically, not on paper, but practically at the balance, we have a huge drain of foreign currency coming out of the country and very little foreign currency coming in the country. And this is one of the, plus the servicing of the foreign debt. And you understand why the lari is devaluating by the day.
Would you name like different business associations of the country, business ombudsman, investors council, all these bodies that need to be working for better business environment? Do you think their input is and effort is seen into the overall business environment picture?
Also here you have two antagonistic currents that relates to the business environment and to the investment climate. So on one hand, you have the government that officially declares that they want foreign investors here. Business organizations that are trying, to improve things, and the government like Invest in Georgia and those bodies under the Ministry of Economy who prepare the studies about how to improve the business climate, okay? And the ambassadors abroad, Georgian ambassadors who are saying, come to Georgia, it's very friendly. Okay, so this is one part. Then you have another part that is prohibiting foreign investments in Georgia. And those are the guys who are under Bidzina Ivanishvili, who take orders from Bidzina Ivanishvili, who are sending out from foreign investors from the borders, returning them when they arrive, or tourists from many nationalities, who are removing their residencies here without any justification on the basis of that they are a security threat, who are defrauding them, ordering the courts to defraud them, who are racketeering them to impose themselves as protection on them.
So these are the specific examples that you have encountered as ICC head?
This is what we see every day. And I sent many letters to the prime ministers in this respect. And not only in the media, you cannot work like this if you want foreign investors. And that's why Georgia lost totally its attractiveness to foreign investors in the past 8 years, especially in the past 4 years.
Listening to Fadi, would you invest in Georgia?
I don't invest my own money in Georgia. Why do you want me to? I cannot encourage anyone to invest in Georgia unless I have personal guarantees from Bidzina Ivanishvili himself that he will not touch foreign investors anymore. I cannot. It is unethical, it is inappropriate, and it's my personal responsibility. And if I encourage them, I explain to them the reality, exactly what is going on, so they know the full pictures, and then it's their decision.
Are there any opportunities that you see during these hard times, including context of pandemic, all the problems that you have identified as the head of the largest international business community?
Yes, there are. There are many opportunities. There are many Georgians who are looking for foreign partners. There are many assets and many projects that are worth investment. And of course, anyone who has money abroad and who would come to Georgia and who would be convinced by the country can make money, can develop their business, can use it as a base to expand in the region. Georgia has a huge potential.
What needs to be done?
I will tell you, it needs political will.
Thank you.
And while the checkpoints is drawing to an end, we'll start presenting to you those who run for the elections 2020 and have a vision for the economy and business environment. First in this series happens to be Mamuka Khazaradze, representing political party Lelo.
While talking about competitive advantages of the little statement in regards of economic development. You mentioned about a few details. Well, actually, it's not the details. It's quite ambitious statements coming from your program. But anyway, what's going to be your competitive advantage due to other parties which are not as newly established as you are?
First of all, I would like to say that our plan, which we call the Lelos New Marshall Plan, I don't want to explain. I think everybody knows what is a Marshall Plan is. This is a very concrete plan for reconstruction of Georgia, and our competitive advantage is based on the people, professional people, and the professionally done program, which is the, as I said, it's a Lelos Marshall Plan.
Lelos Marshall Plan is fully contributed by local authors, local experts, I mean your team, or you invited some foreign experts to contribute while developing this program?
We have in-house very strong team, professional team, but same time we were working with the several professionals from United States, from Turkey, from Europe, to help us to develop some of the ideas which we implemented in our program.
We saw and witnessed some international organizations, IFIs and ambassadors attending your economic, not just economic, I mean all your activities. My pre-last question is whether some samples of the various countries' development is taken into consideration as a part, as a future model of Georgia's economic allocation?
Yes, we have several ideas which we think that will be very helpful for Georgian development. One of the ideas is the credit guaranteed fund, 3 billion fund. One of the ideas to establish the international stock exchange in Georgia to make the Georgia as a financial center of the region. One of the ideas to establish the international arbitrage in Georgia, just to give the very clear framework, legal framework for the local and international businesses. So, and some other ideas, but of course the many ideas we brought from different countries and different experience.
And the final question is in regards of Georgian regions. You allocated all the Georgian regions, main cities also, as a most attractive for areas, as you call, regional mega projects.
Yes.
I mean, how were they identified? Did you make additional researches, or it's something which is right now issued by yourself and your team?
So, first of all, we identified the new ideas, but same time we took in our consideration the history and behavior of the people and local businesses. So
regional specifics.
Regional specifics. So, and because we believe the regional development is only right approach to build Georgia and to not have Tbilisi as a only one center of businesses and culture or infrastructure or something like that. Georgia is a small country and we can develop Georgia's all region equally.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we will continue to bring these voices closer to you. Today it's time to wrap it up. Till Sunday then, and goodbye for now.
See you.